it's kind of intimidating to take on such a big topic for hundreds of people at once who all come with like different expectations and understandings of, I suppose, not even just what we're going to be talking about, but also what even is AI, artificial intelligence. So I'm looking forward to going on this journey with you, and I'll leave lots of question time so that we can have a bit of back and forth, and we can get to some of the things that you're interested in speaking about. I work for the Mozilla Foundation, as Chiara said, the organization behind Firefox, and I thought I would just mention that we're an unusual tech company in the sense that we have this big consumer-facing product, but we're driven by a nonprofit and nonprofit values. So we have this manifesto with 10 points that has these principles of how we want the internet to be and how we want it to be good for people and for the planet. And that kind of changes our approach to how we develop tech. And I think it enables us kind of to see in contrast with how other people might be approaching tech, or other companies might be approaching tech, how you could do things differently, and how small changes in code or purpose or just like the values that you embed in technologies can really change the outcomes for the people who use them or are exposed to them in different ways. So I've been with Mozilla for about 7 years, and every year I'd help put together this report, the Internet Health Report. We did this status of like, what does it mean for the internet to be healthy? And it's kind of this ecosystem approach, like thinking about the internet not just as something with cables and wires, but something that adapts to human behavior, something that is living and breathing and is an expression of our, of humanity in different ways. And with this ecosystem approach, this way of thinking about how things fit together, you inevitably have to look at all the different things that go into changing how it works. So there's the infrastructure, the cables and the wires, there's the politics around it, the regulation, the code, the communities that build around things, the business models, the way that competition does and doesn't work for different players. And so every year we do the status report, and recently the foundation has pivoted to focus solely on artificial intelligence. And by AI, we take this really kind of broad umbrella approach to all different kinds of machine learning, generative AI is part of that, but also automation, or it could be recommendation engines of social media companies. It can be automated content moderation systems. We're really looking at AI and automation in all the places that it shows up, and in ways that can negatively or positively affect people around the world. And that's a really big topic, particularly when you're really critical of a technology. You begin to question everything, both about how it's put together, but even, its name. Like, it's not artificial, it's not intelligent. So what do you call it? How can you be more descriptive and more fair? How can you really highlight the intention with which some of these technologies are created, and at the same time think about how to put them to good use? So for last year's report, we decided to create a podcast where we could tell the stories of inspirational ways that people are approaching AI in real life. And those are some of the stories that I want to share with you today. I want to share some of our thoughts, or I should say facts, around how AI is created, what the AI ecosystem looks like, and then some stories about how people are using AI in different ways as part of their nonprofit mission. And then we could have a conversation about what comes to mind for you and what questions you have. So this is on the presentation. You can see like a picture from the podcast, photos of some of the people who appeared, our host Bridget Todd. And all the data visuals that I'm going to share with you here today are also on this website. that I shared. And so for this podcast, kind of setting the stage for these stories were facts that we compiled from different research papers created by AI researchers in different parts of the world. And I'm just going to show you a couple of them to kind of show how our thinking is shaped, and to take you on the journey that I went through in trying to understand how these technologies work, because it is really complicated and there's a lot of different components to what we then think about as AI. But it's not the kind of thing that you should be intimidated by if you don't, understand all of it. You'll see quickly that there are like different entry points and different it's possible to engage on these topics at a high level without knowing exactly how the technology works. So this map is one that we decided to put on the homepage. And the question that we were asking initially is, well, who has power over AI? When we're talking about AI in this like broad sense, who really influences what it looks like, what it sounds like, and how it works? And this graphic is actually of a representation of data sets that are used to measure the performance of AI in different research papers over the past many years. And what you should take from it is not that AI is only being developed in the countries that are fat. What you should take from it is that the AI that's being used all over the world is measured in performance according to some metrics, some benchmarks that are developed in primarily the United States, some countries in Europe, and you can kind of see how it's warped. We're talking north to south. The other thing, and this graph here relates to the map that you just saw. Those data sets that we're talking about that are used to benchmark AI around the world are created from just a handful of institutions. So this small number of organizations, you have Stanford, Microsoft, Princeton University, Google, these very powerful elite organizations are responsible for more than half of these data sets that are used all over the world. So just 12 organizations, and yet we're talking about technologies that people are saying are changing every single industry of the world, are being involved in automation and different kinds of, products, resources, education, government, you name it, right? That's why this is so exciting, because it's changing so much of what is happening. And these data sets, what is inside them? And again, it's really unfair of me to be talking about so many different kinds of AI at once. But when we talk about AI, for instance, that can recognize what is on a picture, let's say, or AI that can create a brand new picture based on a prompt, you're basing that training for the AI on data sets that are composed of, let's say, in the case of images, it would be large numbers of images that are often scraped from the internet and then categorized in some way by humans, and then made available to train AI. And a similar thing when you're talking about the text generators, like ChatGPT, we're talking about AI models that are trained on data that is almost the size of the entire internet. So text that's scraped from the internet, all kinds of information from different databases, whatever is available, the bigger the better is kind of what the big tech companies have been doing for a long time with these tech. What we know, and what I know, especially as somebody who's been talking about the health of the internet, is that when you take things off the internet and the internet isn't very healthy, you also get a lot of really negative content. You get illegal content, you get pornography, you get sexist stuff, you get hate speech. There's a lot of this stuff that gets just kind of trawled into the data sets that then help inform how the AI technologies work in the future. And I mentioned the sort of elite institutions that are leading the way when it comes to developing data sets and developing also a lot of the AI that we end up using. This graph here is more of the big tech companies that we are familiar with and we interact with on a daily basis. You've got Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and then in China you have Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu. And this graph, you don't even bother zooming in so much. It shows how their annual revenues have been going up and up. These are really large companies, and I think it's just worth emphasizing that they aren't just the biggest tech companies, they're literally the biggest companies in the world. They are so large and they are so powerful, and they are really some of the leading companies behind funding and developing of AI. And I thought I would just use this one example of how Amazon makes money with AI. And you can see the different types of AI that I'm talking about and how central it is to their business model. All those companies make money in different ways. Google, sells ads based off data. Apple mainly sells computer products. Amazon, you can see here the biggest square at the top represents their online stores. When you shop on Amazon.com or .ca in your case. You also have cloud computing is a big part of what they do. And it's also something that's central to AI and to data collection that goes into AI. You also have advertising and third-party seller services and subscription services and different systems that take the data that they gather from people who use their services and then go into creating, for instance, recommendations or showing, trying to estimate what one customer would like above another. The way that their physical stores, because they have physical supermarkets, the way they work now, you walk in, there might be a biometric scan, which again is AI, to recognize your fingerprint or your face. Cameras are watching you as you walk around the store. And even the checkout is automated. So you could walk out of the store with your groceries in your bag without even showing a credit card. So this kind of automation and technology is a core to how they make money in a lot of different revenue categories. And the same is true of a lot of other big tech companies. So when we wonder, well, why are they making this AI? Why do they put so much money into the research behind the scenes? There is a profit motive, and it helps direct, I think, a lot of the conversation around how AI is developed and what it's for. It doesn't mean that they decide everything, but when we're thinking about the ecosystem, it's really important to acknowledge how powerful big tech is in this field. And I think big tech is also part of promoting this narrative that these technologies should be trusted, that these technologies can be more intelligent than a human, or that they could be something that's fail-safe or better than what a human could do. And I think that's where we start to see, headlines in the news about things that go wrong with AI. And I'm sure that we don't even hear the half of it. Governments that will use it for surveillance systems or to identify suspects, or who might be, predictive policing, who might be more likely to commit a crime, or, in medical contexts, how the data that goes into creating these AI systems might actually be getting things wrong, or have blind spots that make it difficult for them to see, harms that could be occurring. And so part of what we have in this AI ecosystem is a lot of what some researchers call snake oil, where things will be pushed that perhaps aren't ready for market, and also a lot of overconfidence, not just in the companies and among the developers who create the technologies, but also in the organizations or governments, et cetera, that deploy them. Here's an interesting piece of research. We made the data visual for this. And I should say, if you look on the website, these are all data visuals that are based on research by others, and it's all credited on the website. I think it might be too small for you to read everything, but the names are there. This was another piece, a research paper by a group of researchers that looked at the values advanced in machine learning research. And so these are like research academic papers that are shared at AI conferences, but like the leading AI conferences. And the 100 most highly cited papers at 2 of these major conferences, they did an analysis to see, well, how many of them actually talk about ethical principles or user rights, and how many of them are purely focused on technical performance related things. And the big stack of papers here, 97% of the papers were almost entirely focused on technical performance. And here we have, you know, the 1.21% were focused on ethics, 1.78% on user rights. And it can give you a little bit of a sense of, you know, we might be talking about AI ethics more and more, and it might be showing up in newspaper articles or in conversations between us. But in terms of the research that goes into creating these systems, it's still, you know, not an overarching concern to the extent that maybe it could be, considering how big of an impact these technologies are having all over the world. Here again, we're looking at the 100 most highly cited papers, similar as the previous graph. And we're talking from 2008 to 2019. So over 10 years, you can also see how the blue section above is papers that have big tech affiliations. So where it's researchers that work directly for big tech companies, or who might have other corporate affiliations. And then the pink part is not corporate affiliation, so it could be universities or other kind of entities. But you can see how the influence of big tech is growing over the past 10 years. And I think that's a significant thing to have in mind when we're thinking about how do these technologies work for people. And now we'll kind of shift over to talk about some of the things that people are doing with AI for their communities in ways that are inspirational. And what you'll see is that some of these stories are directly in contrast, I'd say, to things that big tech have been promoting or doing. So this example here, the AI Medicine Cabinet, it's a title from one of the episodes of the podcast. And in each of these episodes of podcasts, we talk to 3 to 4 different people with different stories that intertwine. And I'll just share one story from each of the 5 episodes. But this one is about a man named Avery Smith. He lives in DC, and he lost his wife to skin cancer. And part of the context for this is that around the time that this happened, not long after, some Google and big tech companies were talking about these skincare, these skin diagnostic systems, where you could take a picture of a skin problem and have it diagnosed by an AI system. And it gets, you know, shared as something amazing, remarkable, revolutionary even. And what Avery saw and what other critics saw were that the data sets that these systems were trained on had almost no photos of dark skin. They're almost entirely made up of white skin, with the result that it's very good at diagnosing people with white skin with the different diseases, but less effective when it comes to people who are black and brown. And so he set about creating an alternative system, a database built with communities that also focused on connecting Black patients to Black dermatologists in the United States. And his project was called Melalogic, and the creation of this data set was part of, I'd say, how he was building an AI system to counter a wrong and a sort of injustice in the field of tech, and at the same time, do something practical for his community that might save people like his wife. This is a project from South Africa. This woman is named Riseche Safala, and she is working on what she calls the spatial legacy of apartheid, which she's an AI researcher, and she was interested in doing some research around why is there such a difference in public services between former townships in South Africa and suburbs in South Africa. Why are the hospitals much better in suburban areas than they are in former townships? And she was really interested in looking at resource distribution. But what she realized was that the government in South Africa didn't even have those district boundaries delineated in their data sets that they were using, because after apartheid ended, they decided to categorize everything as either residential or non-residential, because townships didn't exist anymore. But despite that change in category, the injustice still exists. And Riseche Safala grew up in a township and lived this, and decided that she would create a data set that would allow her to do this analysis. And so she combined satellite images with local knowledge of people who knew the geography around townships to be able to, for the entire country, visually recognize on a map what is a township and what is a suburb, and how can we measure over time, by using data sets over time, how can we measure how the size and placement of former townships have grown or expanded, and create some comparison that would enable people who work on economic justice, housing justice, different issues, to be smarter and to have evidence for the things that they are experiencing but aren't able to prove in a way that will help them get rights, rights heard for people. And so it's an interesting example of, I'd say, using optical recognition, using satellite images, using a lot of technologies that are actually developed for other purposes, pairing them with public databases and data sets, and creating new ones that can then be combined to make a whole community smarter. And part of what is interesting about her research is also the acknowledgement of how dangerous it even is to create this kind of data, because if you have data about how where poor people live versus where rich people live, how might that impact their economic opportunities if it's easy for insurance companies or car salespeople, etc., to know where you live and what kind of area that is? How might that influence different people? So they created the data set with some caveats and with some, hope that they didn't put it openly on the internet, but they asked people to contact them. But it's tricky to do this kind of work. Here's another one. When an algorithm is your boss, this was really focused on labor rights and platform workers, people who do work for delivery apps and that type of work, which is highly automated and highly controlled by AI and different automated systems. And Eduardo here lives in Ecuador, works in Ecuador. He works for a tech company called ThoughtWorks that has a social mission as well. And they've been doing collaborations with labor groups and organizations of app drivers. Excuse me. And what they wanted to do was, the drivers were saying that they were getting unfair wages. They weren't getting what the companies were promising them. And they wanted to reverse engineer the information. Sorry, I just coughed. They wanted to take the information from lots of different drivers and create kind of audit these delivery apps in order without having access to the data of these companies, be able to gather information that the drivers can use to make better decisions. And this is a category that you see a lot, I think, in nonprofit work now. Excuse me, where people who are dependent on automated systems are looking for ways to fight back. And often it will be taking some of the tools of the companies or entities and kind of turning them against the companies themselves to either document wrong or create more knowledge awareness for themselves. Yashi Milner is a person that we talked to as well. She's the founder of a nonprofit called Data for Black Lives. And again, very strong community that looks a lot at how AI-powered tools are used to survey and criminalize Black and Brown communities, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so thinking about how these high-tech systems are used, promoted, developed specifically for surveillance, kind of calling them out for what they are, is a really important part of the work. And then thinking about how can you gather data to counter that. And they did really fascinating work around COVID, gathering data about how different communities were being affected by COVID. They do a lot of work with hackathons, like bringing tech people together with community people to think about what kind of data is missing in ways that is affecting the outputs of AI systems, and how can you correct that, and how can you create systems that are owned and controlled by the communities that they're meant to serve, and how can you create, a counter narrative. So there's part critique, and then there's part like fighting back. And I think this is really where a lot of the most inspirational work is for me, is people who are developing their own systems, where kind of picking up where the companies left off because they didn't care or didn't prioritize the lives of the people they affect. This woman, Tarunima Prabhakar, she's in India. The work that she's been doing is around content moderation of WhatsApp, Facebook, social media. You think it's bad in English, and it's just so much worse in other countries. Disinformation is rampant. The large companies, despite having users, billions of users around the world, they don't do as much moderation or safety work in other languages, and it has really, very significant consequences for conflict and hate speech and so forth. Tarunima works for a community that is creating its own tools to help people identify hate speech in different languages on groups on WhatsApp, groups in social media, and trying to think of how to build tools that are kind of layered on top of what the social media companies offer you. So rather than telling people that they shouldn't be using WhatsApp or they shouldn't be using Facebook or Instagram or what have you, thinking about how can you enable people to use these systems that they often need for their livelihood or to communicate with family and loved ones, but make them safer and enable people to set their own settings for what they want to see or don't want to see, and what they themselves consider harmful or hateful that might not in any way be on the radar of companies that are based in the United States and don't really care what is happening around the world. So that was my lightning fast run through of some of the things that I've seen around the world. We're researching the next season of another podcast right now, and so we have a bunch of ideas of how we're thinking about communicating stories around large language models, ChatGPT. How do we involve more organizations, more people in thinking about how to tackle these things? And I work for Mozilla. The Insights team is very small. but our approach to how we work and how we listen is involving fellows, involving grantees. We work with people all over the world, and our funding, I'd say, a mixture of both tech um, projects and products, but also community work, artwork, different explorations of how to do this type of work in a way that's responsible, or how we call it trustworthy, because it is really difficult when there are so many different components that are meshing together to make this stuff that we call AI.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Solana. Such a thought-provoking and I would say even motivating presentation, because it really helps us to think more critically about AI and the role it plays in our lives, but also how we can keep AI accountable in our work and in our lives. Before we get into some Q&A, I'd just like to invite our attendees, because I see there's still hundreds of us in the room, to share your questions with us if you haven't already, but also any thoughts and responses that you might have to what Solana has presented on, and yeah, how it resonates with you, any concerns or any inspiration points that it might provide. But we certainly have quite a few questions to get us started already, and I particularly liked how you opened in the beginning by pointing out, in terms of language and narrative, how we have these discrepancies, or these manipulating ways of approaching AI. Is it artificial? It's not intelligent. What is it? And I also liked how you framed this presentation as part of engaging critically with AI is to bring in the critiques about how it's currently set up, but then also fighting back against this current ecosystem and its structure. So I'd be curious, in your experience, what are some entry points or first steps that we can take to empower people to understand AI, because it's still operating in a climate of a lot of fear and concern, maybe misunderstanding. And it's perhaps an unfair question because it's a huge question. So feel free to tackle it in the way that makes the most sense to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an intimidating topic to our detriment, right? Because it makes you feel like, and I feel like this is also this plays into the interests of those who develop it and who may want to like skate over some of the ethical things. A lot of us feel like we're not qualified enough to talk about these issues or engage on these issues. And what I would say to people who work for nonprofits is, you might not know the tech, but you definitely know the humans, and you definitely know the systems of oppression, of inequity, that you know. And that's something where the tech developers don't, you know, and part of the disconnect in the harms that some of these systems create is exactly there. And so the hope for making these systems more trustworthy and better is really for more nonprofits and others who aren't part of the tech industry to engage on these questions and like ask questions, assume that what they bring to the table has worth, and then also to recognize that tech is shiny and useful and helps in a lot of practical ways, but you know, it is part of the systems that a lot of us are, you know, would be fighting to improve or change. And so when you use these technologies, you have to do them with an awareness of the fact that, you know, they go hand in hand with systems of oppression. I mean, that's my personal view. And so AI or artificial intelligence, people would say, well, that's marketing talk. It's marketing talk to call it artificial intelligence. It's not an accurate descriptor for what it is. So some people will say it's so-called AI, but I mean, at the same time, it can also be a distraction to get too bogged down on, you know, definitions. I think the main thing is figure out if these technologies can help you with your work. without undermining what you stand for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that answer. Actually, it ties quite well into the next question, which is around the general governance of AI. So as a nonprofit who is now, especially the Mozilla Foundation, been pivoting to focus on trustworthy AI, what is the vision for how we govern AI? Is it more governments and multilateral organizations stepping in with regulations, or is it more of a nonprofit model that's led by civil society, a combination of these options? Like where does oversight and where can accountability lie?
Yeah, it's a combination. And I think this idea that you can't regulate AI or you can't regulate big tech is also a farce, is something that will be pushed by those who don't want to be regulated. It's absolutely possible, and it's something that we also focus on in our policy work, both in the EU and in different parts of the world. There are opportunities. Um, part of what you need to look at, I think, there's the data privacy. There's been a long time issue of Mozilla, but also like for everyone. Data privacy is a key thing for AI as well. And rights to transparency and knowing what's happening when you're even exposed to AI. We don't know that half the time. You don't know always if you're interacting with an AI system, or who's controlling it, what it's set to do. There's a lot more information that we could be have as consumers, or consumer rights organizations. And then with things like generative AI, or even these large data sets I was talking about, or small data sets, like they're what you call downstream effects, where these technologies build on top of each other. So you put one thing on top of another, and then you fine tune it, and then you mix it with something else, and you combine data sets. And so there's a whole supply chain, really, that goes into advanced AI systems. And when they are used for harm, who has the responsibility? And how do you distribute that responsibility from, the beginning of the chain to the end? That's where we need to get creative in terms of regulation. And it is really possible and necessary, because it isn't enough just to be like, oh, I made this thing. It's not my problem how people use it. I think we all need to be paying more attention to both the, especially the risks, and not just the opportunities. That's part of the answer. Civil society is key. Civil society engagement with regulators is key. And the regulators aren't tech experts either. And these are really fast moving topics. So it is possible. I hope things are happening soon.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
Yeah, well, you make a very good point, because also there's another very entrenched misnomer in the technology field, which is centering the word a user, which is another way to downplay the existence of citizens who connect to the internet and technology products, who then, if you're a citizen, you also have rights. And the question of digital rights is often obscured in these conversations in the name of progress or innovation or convenience. And so I think that's the other side of the governance and regulation conversation, which is also from the perspective of, let's call them users or citizens, people who connect with these products or are exposed to them without knowing. What are some of the rights that we should be advocating for or keeping in mind when we're having a conversation, not just about accountability, but an ethical approach to AI in general? And I know you mentioned privacy being one of them. Are there others that come to mind?
Yeah, it's tricky, because it comes up when these are products, like you said, products with users, but they've risen in importance and in size to the level of public infrastructure. So the companies aren't designed to put people or citizens ahead of their profits. They're primarily motivated by their shareholders and their profits. So a disconnect. And so how do you get around that? I think part of it is making those big companies less powerful to the extent that you could have more alternatives coexisting. You would have real, hopefully real options for people to be able to pick and choose, have more private options that are viable and that have an opportunity to be sustainable. And then I think it's a shame or like unfair that all this stuff gets put on the consumer or the citizen. I mean, these are really things that are systems level problems. You know, why has it become normal that data is collected and sold on such a massive scale, left and right? That's the reason that we have so many of these AI systems now at this point in time, is because of this rampant data collection that's been going on for years. And, you know, it shouldn't be, I don't think it should be allowed. Unfortunately, it plays into the hands of not just companies, but also governments, you know, and for surveillance and that kind of thing. So, definitely politics, regulation, you know, if you're able, make choices as a consumer to make sure that alternatives exist. Like, yes, Firefox, but you know, use Signal instead of WhatsApp if you can. Those kind of things. But the change needs to happen on a mass scale. And when we're talking about all this like overexcitement with ChatGPT right now, I think it's also, we need to all like step back a moment and just think about who do we trust on these topics. Not to get swept away by the headlines, not to imagine that these systems are going to, you know, obliterate all of humanity. You know, there are dangers, but you know, there are dangers now, there are dangers in, you know, there's a danger of disinformation. There's already disinformation. So like a lot of the things that are happening are extensions of the things that have been going on for a long time. So it's just like, keep reality check, think about who you trust, who you want to trust on these issues, pick and choose, and you know, take a measured, calm approach. Don't rush into things until you really explore the criticism as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very powerful reminder to always question the narratives of tech utopianism or optimism that are quite widespread. And I'm glad you brought up ChatGPT, because I think that's also another point of confusion, perhaps, where in public conversations we're almost conflating AI with ChatGPT or similar tools, when in reality, as an ecosystem, it's far more embedded in our, as you mentioned, infrastructure, services, in our systems, including medical research or food distribution logistics, or you know, even just in the travel industry. It's just everywhere, but we perhaps willingly or not are being told to focus or to think of it only as ChatGPT and similar tools. And we did get a question from one of our audience members that was asking for organizations not directly tied into the use or development of AI tools. And they were citing examples such as health and education, although we can argue that there are already uses for that. But how should we approach tools like ChatGPT that are already in widespread use in a way that is in alignment with this trustworthy and ethical approach?
Mm-hmm. I think some of that is yet to be determined. I like what you said about how, you know, it's embedded in the system. Like there's a lot of cloak and dagger, I guess is what you would call it. Like there's hidden. I read some time ago about who are the biggest investors in AI. There was an article, but they were talking about fast food chains like McDonald's making huge investments in AI systems and essentially becoming tech companies in a lot of different ways. And how they would work, you know, it would be like the license, you go to the drive-in to buy a burger, and then it would look at your license plate. It would analyze, what did you order the last time? What would you want to order the next time? What do people who order similar to you, you know, what would they want to buy? What kind of prompts do they respond the most to? And so these ways that the systems are designed to essentially sell you things better, the way that Amazon is also trying to sell you things better, or the way that dating apps will look at differential pricing for different, types of people, or how they pair people. It's so embedded in so much of our life, which is online life. So knowing and not knowing where it is key. ChatGPT is going to have a similar kind of effect, and if not ChatGPT, then like similar systems to ChatGPT, where a lot of time it's customer support at your bank, for instance. They might make a special version of ChatGPT, like a custom version where it's trained on their bank data. So you're talking to the bank, but it's via ChatGPT, and then the bank will pay a subscription to OpenAI, and that's OpenAI's business model. It's essentially like a business-to-business service rather than, just you or I messing around or asking it to write essays or whatever. So when you then use that system, you're also giving all your data to OpenAI, and they use the data that people, when they're interacting with it, they use it to continue training the system. And we don't really know about the privacy protections. We don't really know how they handle that data. How do they keep it separate from other people's data? There's enormous amounts of privacy in that. And so when you have nonprofits who are saying, oh, well, it would be great to, let's have a chat bot talk to our constituents, you would have a number of different options for how to do that. You could make a kind of a low-tech version of a chat bot that wasn't created with OpenAI's gigantic large language model, or you could buy this like service from them. And there's some really, I'm sure there are lots of examples where it goes well. There's also a number where it goes badly that are kind of illustrative for like the worst case scenario. There was a story that went viral a while back. It was a hotline for eating disorders in the UK. And so the phone number, you could call and you could get advice if you needed help or somebody to listen to you. And the phone operators had been pushing for more pay from this nonprofit organization. And instead of giving them more pay or allowing them to, I don't know if they were unionizing, I think they were just like collective bargaining, but they fired all of the phone operators and installed a chat bot that people in trouble could talk to instead. And the chat bot started telling people how they could lose weight, giving them advice on how to eat differently or how to weigh themselves, essentially doing like the opposite of what somebody in that position should be doing. And then it got recalled, and there were Twitter screenshots all over, and the story went viral. And I think it's one of these examples of people putting too much trust in a system in in an area where it can do extreme harm. Was it necessary to have a chatbot that was trained on the entire internet's garbage as well as stuff? Maybe not. So I think that those are the types of things where it's like maybe it doesn't have to be a chatbot. Maybe it doesn't have to be with OpenAI. The newer or the like alternative, more private versions where you keep all the data, where maybe you use smaller data sets, smaller training. That's really exciting. There's a lot of like in open source technology around that, but you still have some of these downstream effects from maybe the original large language model that it was trained on. So it depends. It depends. A lot of people are talking about this large language model that was released by Facebook, Meta, recently. And they've made some safety protections in there to make sure that it doesn't say really horrible things. Excuse me. So it did get better, but you still put a lot of trust in them. Will they change it? You don't know. You don't know, have all the information basically. So
I have a question that may be a bit of a two-parter, so we'll start with the first part of it, which you've also highlighted some really inspiring examples from fellows and community members in the Mozilla Foundation's ecosystem that are fighting back and creating their own alternatives and solutions against many of the same cautionary tales and critiques that you've raised on the use of AI? And more generally, do you see any beneficial uses of AI in general beyond, say, tools like ChatGPT that can help nonprofits be more effective at growing their impact or their reach or facilitating change in ethical and responsible ways?
Yes, but it's difficult. It's not something to enter into lightly. Like even some of the examples that I've seen where, for instance, workers are gathering information or data about labor abuses. Some of the tools that people are able to create, they're not able to be as fancy or high tech or maybe as secure as some of the other systems that we're used to using. And then you have this thing with data. Like data is really is tricky. It's powerful. It's dangerous. Who deletes it? Who has control over it? Like you get all this information in spreadsheets. How do you manage it? How do you handle it? It's really difficult, and you need some degree of expertise to do this. Having said that, I think it's really important for nonprofits to have a strategy about the data that they do want to collect, as well as the data that they don't want to collect. And this is a data-driven society, I guess is what people say, but the standard for evidence is high. So if you want to document human rights abuses, you need to have the data. What kind of data? What kind of videos? What is the trail of documentation? And that is, that's the kind of thing that's going to increase, when you're able to create fakes of everything so easily. We're going to have to be much better at documenting the things that we're talking about and the injustices that we're talking about, because that's how decisions get made now, is by proving things. And so who are your partners when you want to start working with data? How do you protect everybody who's involved? How do you give the people whose data you're working with control over that data and some like governance and understanding of that data? These are all like really important questions to get right. And you can call it governance, you could call it community management, community safety. It's a lot that maybe we're not used to thinking about if our core focus is environment or youth or something else, but we need to be expanding the toolkit for working with both data and tech, and AI can be a part of that for sure. But I think there's probably other things that might be more urgent before that. Where I think we should be focusing is really on where is AI being applied to the communities that we work on behalf of, and what problems might be there. Because that is an area where things are still really in flux, and where I think it's important to fight against systems of oppression before they get really, stuck.
Absolutely. And you're giving us a lot to think about. So we only have a few minutes left, but before we say goodbye, I'd love to give folks an opportunity to know more about Mozilla's work, which in this field I think is so vital to democracy and empowering communities. So what are the best ways to follow along on your future updates and the work that you spotlight from fellows and community members, and how to access, capacity building resources? And perhaps you can tell us a bit about Mozilla.ai as well.
Yeah, the links on this page are definitely where you should start if you want to look at the data visuals and learn more facts about AI. Go to the first link. You'll also find the link to the podcast there. Follow it. You can listen to the previous season, and there's another season coming soon. Foundation.mozilla.org is a nice place to check out different things that we're doing around AI. And there's often I'd say also grant opportunities, research grants, fellowships, different, investment projects. It really is in some ways like a learning project of like learning together, building together, trying to take some of these ideas from like open source software, but apply them to this mission driven work that we're doing around AI. And Mozilla AI is a new project. I didn't add the link here. The website is still pretty basic because it's a new initiative, but we set some money aside as an organization to really focus on different ways to invest in AI that put people ahead of profit, basically. And there's a number of things around that where we say, okay, we've been doing advocacy and policy for a long time, but we also need to support people who are building tech differently.
I think that's such a powerful and hopeful note to end on after having explored the dark side of AI in this climate of fear and greed and harm. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and your rich prompts. And we're really excited to follow along in your work and Mozilla's work in this area. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to join us. So just a reminder, we will be posting the recording of this webinar on our website if you'd like